A mother's warning. Leah was a vision in the quiet village of Avonridge, where the forest whispered secrets, and fields stretched endlessly beneath the sun. Her beauty, natural and unpretentious, mirrored the simplicity of her surroundings, but it was her heart, a blend of innocence and resilience, that made her beloved by all. Her mother, Miriam, was her anchor. Though life had weathered her with trials and loss, Miriam carried herself with a quiet dignity. She would often sit on the porch, sewing or mending, while imparting her wisdom to Leah. "One thing you must remember, my child," Miriam said one evening, her voice tinged with gravity. "There's a price for wealth that's not earned honestly. It may not come today or tomorrow, but it always comes. And men, Leah, men with wicked intentions will often dress them in kind words and pretty promises. Be wary, my dear." Leah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her mother's face. "I know, Mama. I won't let anyone take advantage of me." But fate didn't allow much time for Leah to prove her resolve. When Miriam fell ill, it was as if the light in their little home dimmed. Leah worked tirelessly, doing what she could to provide care, but the sickness was relentless. One morning, as dawn broke over the hills, Leah found herself alone. Her mother's passing left a void so deep it felt like the entire world had shifted. Grief was a heavy weight, but the world didn't stop turning. Leah poured herself into work, trying to keep her head above water. Days bled into weeks until, one afternoon, a familiar face appeared at her door. Angela, her cousin from the bustling city of Faroden, arrived in a flurry of perfumes and silk dresses. She swept into Leah's modest home with all the energy of the city. "Leah," Angela exclaimed, pulling her into a warm embrace. "You can't live like this, alone, tied to this tiny place. Come with me to the city. There's opportunity there, a better life waiting for you." Leah hesitated, her heart caught between her mother's teachings and the promise of something new. Angela's stories painted the city as a land of possibilities, a place where she could leave her pain behind. And so, with a heavy heart and Miriam's warnings echoing faintly in her mind, Leah packed her few belongings and stepped into the unknown. A step into temptation. The city of Faroden was everything Leah imagined and more, glittering streets alive with chatter, towering buildings that seemed to touch the clouds, and a constant hum of life that never seemed to rest. Angela's apartment, nestled in an elegant part of town, felt like a dream compared to the modest home Leah had left behind. "Welcome to a new world," Angela said with a wink as she poured Leah a glass of wine. The air was thick with possibility, and for a moment, Leah allowed herself to feel hopeful. Angela wasted no time introducing Leah to the city's elite. Dinners were spent in gilded halls with chandeliers casting golden light, and afternoons passed in luxurious boutiques where silks and jewels adorned every surface. It was intoxicating, this life of opulence and ease, and Leah couldn't help but marvel at how far removed it was from her simple village existence. But it wasn't long before Angela's subtle suggestions began to surface. "Leah," Angela began one evening as they sipped champagne on the balcony overlooking the city, "you're beautiful, stunning, really. Men here notice that. And some of them, well, they can make life so much easier for a girl like you." Leah frowned, unsure of what Angela was implying. "What do you mean?" Angela leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "I mean, you don't have to struggle. Men like Edwin Royce, for example, wealthy, generous, and more than willing to help a girl out. You just have to play the part." Leah recoiled slightly, her mother's warnings flashing through her mind. "Angela, I can't. I'm not like that. I don't want to rely on someone else's money." Angela shrugged, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the rim of her glass. "Suit yourself, cousin. But city life isn't cheap. You see." At first, Leah resisted. She threw herself into small jobs, determined to make an honest living. But the city's harsh reality soon set in. Bills piled up, and Angela's patience began to wear thin. Every day, Leah felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. When Angela invited her to a lavish party one evening, Leah hesitated. "It's just a party," Angela coaxed. "You'll have fun, meet people. No harm in that." Reluctantly, Leah agreed. She dressed in a borrowed gown, the shimmering fabric clinging to her like an unfamiliar second skin. The party was held in a sprawling mansion, every corner dripping with wealth and excess. It was there, amidst the laughter and clinking glasses, that Leah met Mr. Edwin Royce. Tall, impeccably dressed, and with an air of practiced charm, he took an immediate interest in her. "You must be new to the city," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. Leah nodded, her unease masked by a polite smile. Over the course of the evening, Edwin's attention didn't waver. He complimented her, charmed her, and finally, as the party began to wind down, made his offer. "I can see you're different, Leah," he said, his eyes glinting under the light. "You're not like the others. If you ever find yourself in need, I'd be happy to help." He slipped a card into her hand, his meaning clear. Leah's heart pounded as she stared at the card, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. But her reality tugged at her, louder than ever. Poverty, loneliness, and struggle loomed like dark shadows over her glittering surroundings. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar comfort of Angela's guest room, Leah realized she was standing at a crossroads. The temptation of an easier life had found her, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could resist. A dangerous game begins. Leah's first step into the world of wealth was hesitant, but it wasn't long before she found herself caught in its pull. The modest girl from Avonridge was gone, replaced by a woman draped in silk gowns and adorned with sparkling jewels. The city's elite embraced her, their admiration feeding the growing need for acceptance and comfort that Leah couldn't ignore. It started innocently enough: dinners at exclusive restaurants, gifts left at Angela's doorstep, and envelopes of cash that she told herself were temporary solutions. "It's just for survival," she repeated in her mind, a mantra to silence the growing unease within her. But as weeks turned to months, survival gave way to indulgence. She began to crave the soft touch of satin sheets, the thrill of expensive perfumes, and the way people's gazes lingered on her when she walked into a room. The small village girl was now a woman of the city, living a life far removed from the simple values her mother had instilled in her. It was at a private gala one evening, shimmering with grandeur, that Leah met Victor Cordwell. He was different from the others, older, yes, but commanding, with an air of power that seemed to draw people to him like moths to a flame. His tailored suit and smooth demeanor spoke of wealth so vast it was almost untouchable. Victor's interest in Leah was immediate and intense. "You're a rare gem," he said, his piercing blue eyes holding hers. "A woman like you deserves more than what this city has to offer." His words were intoxicating, laced with promises of a life she'd never dared dream of. Victor's courtship was calculated. He showered her with gifts that seemed too extravagant to accept but impossible to refuse: diamond necklaces, a private driver, even a luxury apartment she could call her own. "All I ask for is your loyalty, Leah," he said one evening over dinner in his penthouse. "You and I, we could be unstoppable." At first, Leah told herself she was in control. She could play the game, take what she needed, and walk away when the time came. But Victor's influence was insidious. His charm masked a darker side, one that revealed itself in the way he questioned her every move, the way he reminded her of all he'd done for her. "You owe me, Leah," he said one evening, his voice low but firm, after she hesitated to attend an event he insisted on. "I've given you everything. Don't forget that." Leah felt the walls closing in. The luxury that once felt like freedom now felt like a gilded cage. Victor's promises of wealth came with strings, And the deeper she fell into his world, the harder it became to escape. Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked like her. The girl who once worked tirelessly in her village to care for her mother was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. Yet, the allure of the life she'd built, no matter how hollow, kept her rooted in place. For the first time, Leah felt truly trapped. She was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were growing higher with each passing day. The turning point. Leah's beauty and charm had become her calling card in Farodin's elite circles. Her name was whispered at every party, her face gracing the society columns as the city's newest sensation. Men clamored for her attention, lavishing her with gifts and promises. Yet with each adoring glance, Leah felt the weight of her choices pressing heavier on her heart. One of her admirers, Mr. Clarence, stood apart. Distinguished and dignified, he was a respected town elder who carried himself with an air of authority. He treated Leah with unusual reverence, taking her to exclusive events and whispering to her about the power and influence she could wield by staying by his side. Leah, used to men wanting her for superficial reasons, found herself disarmed by his charm. Though his intentions were clear, she allowed herself to indulge, believing his presence added to her prestige in the city. She didn't question the arrangement until one evening when she was introduced to the man Clarence called his son. Nicholas Clarence was everything a man of his background ought to be: handsome, intelligent, and charismatic. Leah couldn't deny the instant spark between them, and to her surprise, Nicholas seemed equally taken with her. For the first time in months, Leah felt a genuine connection, one untainted by the transactional nature of her life in Farodin. But as days passed, the truth emerged. Nicholas was Mr. Clarence's son, and while Leah hadn't crossed any explicit lines, the realization of her entanglement with both father and son hit her like a thunderbolt. Shame and regret coursed through her, but she couldn't see a way out. To refuse Mr. Clarence's continued attentions would risk exposing her past to Nicholas, ruining what fragile connection they'd begun to build. Leah found herself retreating into herself, questioning the path she'd taken. The luxury and fame she once craved now felt hollow, the price too steep to bear. She longed for the simplicity of her life before the city, before the lies, before the wealth that had trapped her. One afternoon, while walking through the park to escape her suffocating thoughts, Leah stumbled upon a familiar face. Samuel, her childhood friend from Avonridge, stood by a cart selling flowers, his warm smile lighting up the bustling city scene. "Leah." Samuel's voice was filled with surprise and delight. "It's really you." For a moment, Leah couldn't speak. Samuel looked almost unchanged, his presence a jarring reminder of the life she had left behind. They spent hours talking, Samuel sharing stories of home, his modest life, and his simple dreams. He spoke of the beauty in living honestly, the peace that came from following one's heart. "You used to dream of teaching children, Leah," Samuel said, his tone soft but firm. "You always wanted to make a difference. Do you remember?" His words struck a chord Leah hadn't felt in years. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That was a long time ago, Samuel. I'm not that person anymore." "You can be," he replied, his gaze steady. "You just have to decide what matters most to you." As Samuel's words echoed in her mind, Leah felt a storm of emotions. Guilt, confusion, and longing swirled within her, leaving her torn between the life she had built and the one she had abandoned. For the first time, she began to wonder if it was too late to turn back, or if she had the strength to reclaim the person she once was. Secrets unveiled. Leah had never imagined finding someone like James. He was nothing like the men she'd encountered in the city. His kindness was genuine, his smile warm and unassuming. A budding entrepreneur, James exuded a quiet confidence that made Leah feel safe, even in her most vulnerable moments. They met at a charity event, one of the few she attended reluctantly, hoping to escape the web of deceit she had woven. James had been drawn to her, not for her beauty or reputation, but for the rare moments when she let her guard down and showed her true self. Over time, their connection deepened. James was unlike anyone she had ever known, and for the first time in years, Leah dared to hope for a future built on love rather than survival. When he proposed, holding out a simple gold ring that symbolized everything pure and honest, Leah said yes. But her heart was heavy with the secret she carried. As their engagement progressed, Leah avoided revealing the truth about her past. She told herself it was for the best, that her old life was behind her, and James didn't need to know. But fear lingered in her heart, a shadow that grew darker with each passing day. Her carefully constructed world came crashing down during a dinner James arranged to introduce her to his family. The evening began with warmth and laughter as Leah met James' mother and siblings in their elegant home. She was determined to make a good impression, pouring every ounce of effort into hiding her nervousness. But then the door opened, and Mr. Clarence stepped into the room. Time seemed to freeze as Leah locked eyes with him. Her breath hitched, and her stomach turned to ice. "Father," James said, smiling warmly. "This is Leah, my fiancée." Leah's world tilted. The man who had once showered her with gifts and promises, the man who had tried to bind her to him with wealth and power, was standing before her as James' father. Mr. Clarence's face betrayed nothing at first, his practiced demeanor held steady as he greeted her politely. But there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a glint that made Leah's heart pound. The evening passed in a haze. Leah could barely focus on the conversation, her mind racing with panic. As soon as the family dispersed after dinner, Mr. Clarence cornered her in the hallway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. Leah followed him into a quiet room, her hands trembling. The moment the door closed, his polite mask fell away. "So," he began, his voice dripping with contempt, "you've moved on to my son now. Is that your plan?" "Please," Leah whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I had no idea James was your son. Does he know who you really are?" Mr. Clarence's eyes burned into hers. "What you've done?" Tears welled up in Leah's eyes. "No, and I'm begging you, don't tell him. I love James. He's different. I'm trying to leave that life behind." Mr. Clarence's expression hardened. "You think you can escape your past? Do you have any idea what this would do to him, to our family?" Leah fell to her knees, the weight of her guilt crushing her. "I'll do anything," she pleaded. "Just, don't tell him. Let me prove I've changed." Mr. Clarence stared at her for a long moment, the tension in the room suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his tone cold and calculating. "If you want my silence, you'll stay away from my son. End this engagement. Do it quickly, and do it quietly." Leah's heart shattered. She had fought so hard to build a future with James, but now it seemed her past had caught up with her, threatening to destroy everything. Left alone in the dimly lit room, Leah realized she was at a crossroads once again. This time, the stakes were higher than ever, and the choice she made would determine whether she could ever truly escape the person she had become. Confrontation and redemption. The truth came out in the most brutal way. Despite Leah's desperate pleas, Mr. Clarence revealed everything to James during a tense conversation. Leah wasn't there to defend herself when the words fell from his lips, and she could only imagine how James must have felt, the betrayal, the anger, the confusion. Later that evening, James arrived at her apartment, his face pale and his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. Leah opened the door, already knowing what was coming. "Is it true?" James asked, his voice shaking. Were you involved with my father?" Leah's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. "James, please let me explain." "Explain," he interrupted, his voice rising. How do you explain something like this, Leah? You lied to me. You hid this from me. Leah stepped closer, her voice trembling. I was scared, James. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I could just leave my past behind, I could be the person you deserved. You should have told me the truth from the beginning, James said, his tone softening but still filled with pain. I trusted you, Leah. I wanted to build a life with you. Leah broke down, the weight of her guilt spilling out in sobs. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I've made so many mistakes, but loving you wasn't one of them. You made me want to be better. You made me believe I could have a second chance. James looked away, his jaw clenched as he wrestled with his emotions. I don't know what to do, Leah. I love you, but this is too much. I need time. Leah nodded through her tears. I understand. You deserve better than this, James. Better than me. The next morning, Leah packed her things and left the apartment. She couldn't bear to stay in a place filled with memories of what could have been. With no clear plan, she wandered the city, her mind filled with her mother's voice and Samuel's words about living honestly. Eventually, she found herself standing in front of a small shelter for underprivileged women. The sign above the door read, Hope Haven. Something about it stirred her, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose. Leah stepped inside and introduced herself to the coordinator, a kind woman named Clara. I'd like to help, Leah said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. I don't have much, but I want to give back. Over the weeks that followed, Leah poured herself into the work. She cleaned, cooked, and counseled women who, like her, had been lost but were searching for a way forward. The work was hard, but it was also healing. Leah began to see herself in a new light, not as the woman defined by her mistakes, but as someone who could make a difference. One evening, as she sat in the shelter's common room with a group of women, Leah realized something profound. She wasn't just helping them. They were helping her, too. With every story shared, every life she touched, she felt her own wounds begin to mend. Though her heart still ached for James, Leah knew she couldn't undo the past. All she could do was move forward and hope that, one day, she would earn the redemption she sought, not through wealth or beauty, but through kindness, humility, and a life lived with integrity. A new beginning. Years passed, and Leah's life became a testament to the power of change. What began as volunteer work at Hope Haven blossomed into a life's mission. Leah now ran the shelter, its halls filled with women and children who had found solace, support, and the courage to rebuild their lives. The transformation wasn't easy. Every step forward required her to confront the shadows of her past. But over time, Leah had built something real, something meaningful. The woman she saw in the mirror now was strong, compassionate, and unrecognizable from the girl who once sought comfort in wealth and luxury. One crisp autumn afternoon, Leah was overseeing renovations to expand the shelter when a familiar voice called her name. She turned, her heart skipping a beat as she saw James standing at the gate. He looked older, more refined, but his smile was the same, warm and sincere. Leah, he said, his voice carrying the weight of years and unspoken words. Leah approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. James, it's been so long. It has, he replied, his eyes scanning the bustling shelter. I heard about the work you've been doing here. It's incredible. Leah smiled, a mixture of pride and humility in her expression. It's been my life. These women, their stories, they remind me of who I used to be, and how far I've come. James nodded, his gaze softening. I've thought about you often, Leah. About us. After you left, I was angry for a long time. But as time passed, I realized something. I never stopped loving you. I just needed to understand the person you were trying to become." Tears welled in Leah's eyes as she looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so afraid of losing you back then. I thought hiding my past would protect what we had. But I was wrong. I should have trusted you." James stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers. "You've grown into someone remarkable, Leah. And now, I see you for who you truly are, a woman of strength, integrity, and compassion. I fell in love with you once, and I think I've fallen in love with you all over again." Leah's heart swelled with emotion as James knelt before her, pulling out a simple, elegant ring. "I don't care about your past," he said. "All I care about is the life we could build together. Leah, will you marry me?" Overwhelmed, Leah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, James." The shelter staff and residents cheered as they watched the proposal unfold, and for the first time in years, Leah felt a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. Their wedding was a simple affair, held in the garden behind the shelter. Surrounded by the people whose lives Leah had touched and who had touched hers in return, the ceremony was a celebration of love, redemption, and new beginnings. As Leah stood beside James, her hand in his, she looked out at the women and children who had become her family. She knew her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. Her life now was built on something far greater than wealth or beauty. It was built on integrity, compassion, and the courage to start again. After the wedding, Leah and James began their life together with a shared purpose, to create a legacy that would outlast them both. James, inspired by Leah's passion, used his business acumen to help expand the shelter's reach, securing funding and resources that Leah had never thought possible. Together, they turned Hope Haven into a beacon of hope for countless women and families across the city. Leah's days were filled with purpose. She mentored young women who had been where she once was, showing them that it was never too late to change. She shared her story with honesty, not hiding the mistakes she had made but using them to inspire others. One day, as she walked through the shelter's garden, where children laughed and played, Leah noticed a young woman sitting alone on a bench, her face clouded with worry. Leah sat beside her and smiled gently. "Hi, I'm Leah," she said. "Do you want to talk?" The young woman hesitated, then nodded, her voice trembling as she said, "I don't know where to start. I've made so many mistakes." Leah reached out, placing a comforting hand on hers. "I know what that feels like," she said softly. "But trust me, no matter how lost you feel, you can always find your way back." The woman looked up, her eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. In that moment, Leah saw herself years ago, broken, uncertain, but yearning for something better. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Leah stood at the shelter's entrance, watching the world go by. James joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Thinking about something?" he asked. Leah smiled, leaning into him. "Just how far we've come. How far I've come. And how grateful I am, for you, for this life, for everything." James kissed her forehead. "You've earned it, Leah. Every bit of it." Leah took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening breeze on her face. Her journey had been long and painful, but it had brought her here, to love, purpose, and a life she could be proud of. And as she stood there, surrounded by the laughter of children and the hum of a shelter alive with hope, Leah knew one thing for certain: her past no longer defined her. Her story was one of redemption, of resilience, and of a future as bright as the stars beginning to twinkle above.